Dr. Xil'var had treated creatures from every corner of the galaxy, from the six-limbed Rithkari to the bioluminescent Fensai, but the being slumped on his examination table made his scales crawl. It was humanoid, wrapped in torn synthetic fiber, its skin marred by deep lacerations that oozed red blood. Mammalian. The records confirmed what his instinct screamed. It was human. He took an involuntary step back, his three hearts hammering against his ribs. The medical records in the Galactic database were sparse but clear. Humans were apex predators. They were endurance hunters, omnivores with iron-rich blood, creatures that could take wounds that would kill most species and keep moving. He had heard stories, whispered accounts of humans laughing off broken bones, of bodies scarred by wounds that should have ended them. The human's face twisted into what Xil'var first mistook for a pained grimace but quickly recognized as a smile. Teeth, flat and sharp in strange proportion, gleamed under the clinic's sterile lighting. "Doc, you're staring," the human rasped. Xil'var's fingers clenched. Its vocal tone suggested amusement, but its expression remained unreadable. He forced himself to look at the injury instead. The wound stretched from the upper torso down to the side, deep enough to expose muscle. No trembling, no signs of shock. The human's kind should not be conscious, let alone speaking. "You require immediate treatment," Xil'var said, keeping his voice even. "The blood loss alone." The human waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, I figured. That's why I'm here." Xil'var hesitated. He had the tools, the knowledge, the sterilized instruments hovering in his med pod, ready for use. But something primal in him rebelled. Treating a predator was not safe. His ancestors had not survived by tending to wounded beasts. They had survived by fleeing. Another alien in the waiting area, a Taraxi, plated in bone-white armor, watched with narrowed eyes. The Glorn beside him, a serpentine healer, clicked their tongue. No one stepped forward to help. They all knew. "This is a medical facility, is it not?" the human prompted. "Because if you're not going to patch me up, I'll just do it myself." Xil'var stared in alarm as the human dug into his own belt pouch, withdrawing a compact medical kit. In one fluid motion, he snapped open a sterile needle, threading it with practiced ease. The Taraxi warrior hissed in horror. The Fensai nurse fainted. Xil'var stood frozen as the human began stitching his own wound. His hands were steady despite the fact that his flesh was splitting beneath them. No pain vocalizations. No hesitation. It was as if he were repairing fabric, not sealing his own living tissue. This was madness. Xil'var forced himself to speak. You are performing surgery on yourself. Without anesthesia." The human didn't pause. "Well, I was hoping you'd handle that part, but here we are." Xil'var's mouth felt dry. The database had mentioned resilience, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The casual disregard for bodily integrity, the sheer indifference to pain. It wasn't just unnatural, it was terrifying. A new wave of nausea rolled over him. No, he was a physician. He had sworn an oath to heal, regardless of species. But something in him, something old, something instinctual, refused to let him approach. He took a measured breath. I cannot treat you." The human's hand stilled. His expression flickered, something unreadable flashing behind his gaze. Not anger, not fear, just understanding. "Figures," he muttered. "Should have known?" He cut the thread with his teeth. The sound of the monofilament snapping made Xil'var's scales bristle. This wasn't right. No sentient should be this accustomed to pain. A Glorn assistant finally found his voice. "We should call someone, a specialist." "Yes." Xil'var latched onto the excuse. "Yes, a specialist. But who?" the Taraxi asked. "You need someone who—" His mandibles clicked, hesitating. "Someone who doesn't fear predators," the Glorn finished. Xil'var's claws tapped against the data screen at his station, scrolling through available medical personnel. His fingers hovered over one name. It was unconventional, but it might be the only option. He turned back to the human, who had already tied off the final stitch and was now digging in his medkit for a dermal patch like this was some routine inconvenience. Xil'var swallowed his apprehension and tapped the communicator. "This is Dr. Xil'var at Station Medical Hub 42B. I require assistance. Patch me through to Dr. Emily Hayes. The Taraxi tilted his head. Dr. Hayes? A human physician? Xil'var shook his head. Asterisk, asterisk, a veterinarian, asterisk, asterisk. Silence stretched between them. Then, incredulous laughter from the human. Oh, this is going to be good? The doors to the medical bay hissed open, and Dr. Emily Hayes strode in like she had all the time in the world. She was tall for a human, lean but solid, with the measured gait of someone who had spent years tending to creatures that outweighed her tenfold. Her gaze swept the room once before locking onto the bloodied figure sitting on the examination table, shirt peeled back, crude stitches crisscrossing his side. She sighed. James, what the hell did you do this time? The injured human, James Carter, if the nameplate on his flight suit was to be believed, grinned, though it looked more like a lopsided grimace. Would you believe me if I said, just a scratch? Dr. Hayes crossed her arms. No, because I actually have a medical degree. Xil'var observed the exchange from the edge of the room, his tail coiled tightly around his lower limbs. He had expected another human to show wariness, perhaps even hesitation, at seeing one of their own so injured. Instead, Dr. Hayes looked more annoyed than alarmed, as if treating a wounded apex predator was merely an inconvenience. Let me see it, she said, stepping forward. Xil'var almost warned her to keep her distance, but she was already peeling back the rough stitching James had done on himself, fingers moving with swift efficiency. The moment she touched the wound, he tensed. Not from pain, asterisk, asterisk, from restraint, asterisk, asterisk. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, controlled, disciplined, the way a creature accustomed to pain chose to endure it. Dr. Hayes didn't acknowledge it. She simply clicked her tongue, reached into her satchel, and pulled out a fresh suture kit. You really are an idiot, you know that? James exhaled through his nose, a huff of something between amusement and resignation. I was improvising. Well, congratulations. You did a terrible job. She pulled a pair of sterile gloves over her hands. Hold still, buddy. The aliens in the room watched in fascinated silence. No caution, no hesitation. She handled him like any other patient. Xil'var finally found his voice. You are comfortable treating him? Dr. Hayes barely glanced at him. Why wouldn't I be? He is a human, Xil'var said, as if that explained everything. She arched a brow. Yeah? And? Their kind are, he hesitated, dangerous, unpredictable, not like us. Dr. Hayes rolled her eyes. Oh, for the love of, listen, doctor. I've stitched up thrashing Zek hounds, wrestled a venomous Bractor into a pressure sling, and once sedated a fully grown Gorlax bull with nothing but a cargo strap and my wits. You think patching up one stubborn idiot is going to faze me? Xil'var had no idea what half those creatures were, but he understood the implication. To her, James Carter wasn't an apex predator. He was just another unruly animal that needed fixing. James smirked, voice dry. Glad to know where I stand on the food chain. Shut up and let me work, Dr. Hayes muttered. The procedure was precise, methodical. She worked with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with patients who couldn't verbalize their pain, or who wouldn't, even if they could. She removed the makeshift stitches, cleaned the wound with antiseptic, then sealed it with a dermal regenerator. Her hands were steady, practiced, utterly unafraid. Xil'var observed her in stunned silence. His own hands had trembled at the mere thought of approaching a wounded human, and yet here she was, chastising one like he was a reckless livestock animal that had gotten itself stuck in a fence. Dr. Hayes finished applying the final sealant and leaned back, inspecting her work. There, that should hold. Try not to rip it open in the next 24 hours, all right? James flexed his arm experimentally. No promises. She gave him a pointed look. If I have to haul you back here because you decided to get into another bar fight, I'm charging triple. Wouldn't dream of it. Satisfied, she stripped off the gloves, tossing them into the disposal unit. Then she turned to Xil'var, arms crossed. So, you called a vet to treat a human. He stiffened under her gaze, though it held none of the aggression he had feared. I did not know who else to contact. You have experience with resilient species, and humans are a lot like stubborn animals, she finished nodding. Yeah, I get it. Xil'var's frills twitched. And You do not fear them? Dr. Hayes considered the question, glancing back at James, who was now testing the flexibility of his patched-up side with a series of exaggerated stretches. She smirked. Nah, they're big, dumb mammals. You just have to know how to handle them. The aliens in the room exchanged glances, the weight of those words settling over them. Xil'var had spent his entire career believing the warnings, the whispered fears about human endurance, their capacity for destruction. But now, watching this calm, pragmatic woman work, he realized something unsettling. Perhaps the reason humans were seen as terrifying wasn't their strength, nor their resilience, nor even their ability to survive grievous wounds. Perhaps the most unsettling thing about humans was that, to them, none of it was strange at all. As the last of the medical tools were put away, the sterile hum of the examination room settled into a quiet lull. Dr. Xil'var found himself watching James Carter with wary curiosity, his trained eye noting how the human moved, rolling his shoulder experimentally, testing the integrity of his newly sealed wound. It was unnatural, not the movement itself, but the sheer ease with which he adapted. A Glorn with such an injury would have been bedridden for days. A Taraxi would have been placed under strict observation. But James? He looked like he was already thinking about his next mission. Dr. Hayes leaned against the counter, arms crossed, observing the same thing. You're going to ignore all my advice and go do something stupid, aren't you? James grinned. Not stupid, just necessary. She exhaled through her nose, muttering something about every damn species being the same, before shaking her head. Well, at least try not to get yourself killed. Xil'var hesitated before speaking. Is this common? Dr. Hayes tilted her head. What is this disregard for injury? The lack of concern for one's own survival. His voice was measured, but even he could hear the unease creeping in. It is difficult to comprehend. James arched a brow. Disregard? Nah, we just bounce back quick. That is an understatement, Xil'var said, his frills flaring slightly. You should not be standing right now, let alone conversing. Any other species would require extensive care. Humans don't have that luxury, James said with a shrug. We evolved to keep going. Our ancestors chased prey until it dropped from exhaustion. We survive because we adapt. Xil'var had read about this. Persistence hunting, it was called, a tactic so disturbingly effective that even advanced species acknowledged its brilliance. But he had assumed it was a relic of the past, something left behind when humans took to the stars. Apparently not. Dr. Hayes chimed in. It's not just about endurance, though. It's about mindset. Humans push through because we have to. There's always another problem to solve, another task that needs doing. She gestured at James. Look at him. He's hurt, but his brain's already moved on to whatever mission he's got next. James didn't deny it. Dwelling on pain doesn't fix anything. Xil'var found that deeply unsettling. Pain is the body's signal to rest, to heal. Sure, James said, but sometimes survival means pushing past that signal. A chill ran down Xil'var's spine. The implications of that statement. How many times had humans ignored pain because stopping meant death? The other aliens in the room were clearly grappling with the same realization. The Taraxi warrior, previously wary, now observed James with something like reluctant respect. The Glorn healer had coiled his limbs tightly, eyes dark with contemplation. Even the Fensine nurse, still regaining consciousness from her earlier fainting spell, seemed unable to look away. Dr. Hayes exhaled. Look, I get it. To a lot of species, we seem reckless. But humans don't think of it that way. We just endure. Xil'var studied her. And you? You do not display the same tendencies as him. You are measured. She smirked. Because I work with animals, doctor. I've learned that strength isn't just about pushing through. It's about knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to let others help. James snorted. You're saying I should have called you sooner. Damn right you should have. A strange feeling settled in Xil'var's chest, something between understanding and unease. This conversation was reshaping his perceptions too quickly, forcing him to confront truths he had previously dismissed. Humans were not merely dangerous. They were adaptable, resilient, capable of treating grievous injury as a mild inconvenience, yet also recognizing when care was necessary. It was a paradox he had never considered. James stretched one last time, apparently satisfied with the repairs. "Well, I should probably get going." Xil'var blinked. "You have just undergone treatment." "And?" James said, throwing on his torn flight jacket. "Ship's not going to fly itself." Xil'var opened his mouth, ready to argue, but Dr. Hayes beat him to it. "Fine, but if you rip those stitches, don't come crying to me." James grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." Dr. Hayes muttered something under her breath before glancing at Xil'var. "See? You get used to them." Xil'var wasn't sure he ever would, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Just curious. As James strode toward the exit, the other aliens instinctively moved aside, not out of fear, but with something new in their expressions. A newfound respect, and perhaps just a little awe.